Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Kate Richards, and today's guest is Jeanine Talento. She is a yoga instructor, a yoga teacher trainer, a writer, and a trauma educator. Would you say that's right, Jeanine?
Yes, that sums it up. Thanks, Kate.
And I'm actually really excited to have you here today because I've been thinking a lot about trauma lately and what that means. Some people I feel like don't even realize they have trauma, and some people are really aware of their trauma. What do you think the difference is for somebody that really feels we've all had some sort of trauma, right? So how do we know if you're not aware, how would you know that you've been traumatized?
It's a very big question, but first of all, thank you for having me. So happy to have
Oh
this
yeah, I just got
conversation.
it.
No, it's good. Let's dive right in. I could talk about this all day, but just wanted to say thank you. Um, Trauma is so interesting, and now it's a word that's tossed around a lot. And so I think it's so clear. The first thing I do on any training or working one-on-one with anyone is to simply define that term, to define what we're actually talking about. And so trauma is not what happens to us. We think it is, right? We think it's an event, we think it's a circumstance, we think it's a life situation, but actually trauma is what happens internally as a response to what happens to us externally. And so trauma is the way that our nervous system and our behavior kind of reorganizes in response to shocking experiences, abuse, neglect. It can be a wide range of different things, what a traumatic event is. And so you said it perfectly. None of us kind of are untouched by traumatic events. In Buddhism, the first noble truth is life is suffering. We will experience suffering, right? So old age, sickness, death, pain, loss, grief, all of it. We'll feel it all in this human life. And so knowing about trauma, having this baseline understanding, foundational education around it can really just help us normalize what so many of us go through in this life, but haven't been taught how to feel or haven't been taught how to process, because we live in a culture that has taught us to numb it or run away from it or act like
Shove it
everything's
down.
okay. Shove it
Yeah,
down and shut it up.
compartmentalize.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting that I've been thinking about lately. It's because like two people could experience the same thing, right? And one will have trauma from it, whereas another might not, because you're saying trauma isn't from necessarily the experience, it's from how we feel about the experience or what
Yeah.
happens within us, right?
Yep.
So some people might not think they have any trauma, and that could be true
Mm-hmm.
because they don't feel that within them, right?
Absolutely.
It's so interesting to me because some people I feel like have pushed their trauma down to where they aren't aware of it anymore, and that would be more like a somatic type situation where it's stored in the body, right?
Trauma is always stored in the body. So trauma lives in the body. It's our entire history is in our physiology in this beautiful vessel we call home. And unfortunately, so many individuals in this world are walking around completely disconnected from their body. So if the body is kind of, as Bessel van der Kolk says, keeping the score of our lives, holding everything for us, but if we're disconnected from our somatic experience, not really feeling the body, then we're missing a lot of the messages that our trauma is trying to give us. The body's speaking to us constantly, but most people don't know how to listen or don't know how to speak that language. So there's
Yes.
that disconnect for many people. So a lot of trauma recovery work is just simply reconnecting to your body so you can hear and feel really, what your body is trying to tell you based on what you've been through.
Yeah, that's actually something that I talk to people about a lot, my clients and whatnot, is that a lot of us don't know how to listen, but the better we get at it and the more we heed those messages, the louder our body starts to speak to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more trust we get in those messages and relying on those messages and acting from those messages instead of going, that's strange thought and kind of pushing it aside, right? So
Mhm.
that that inner voice gets louder and we can trust it more the more that we do it.
Absolutely. And something that happens as a result of holding trauma in the body is that we get really good at finding coping mechanisms. And oftentimes they're maladaptive, but sometimes in society they're rewarded. So something like being busy all the time, being productive all the time, working all the time, you know, turning towards alcohol or shopping or things like that that take us again out of our body, and kind of distract us from exactly what you're saying, this inner knowing, this innate somatic intelligence that we all have.
Mhm.
But we're not taught how to foster that or how to connect to that. But
Mhm.
we're really taught in this culture how to disconnect from that and to focus on our external
Yeah.
appearance and what to buy and how to look and all of these distractions that it's really radical and almost rebellious, I think, to come back to that somatic work.
Yeah, and really I think kind of what you're saying and one of the thoughts that I'm having is that it's a feeling in the body. Sometimes it's less when we listen to the body, it's not necessarily a message, right, in words.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a feeling or an intuition versus it's saying, I need water in words that we might understand, right? It's so I think that can be kind of some of the confusion for people is they think, oh, what's this message? It might not come in the form of a direct, like in a direction, like drink a glass of water or get some sleep
Totally.
or whatever it may be. It's sort of a feeling that we start to, I mean, maybe sometimes it comes as a thought, but a lot of times I think it's a feeling that we start to kind of begin to trust more. And I was reading something interesting lately that said um, only 30 to 60% of people actually have an inner dialogue, which I found really fascinating to think that there's so much of the population just walking around without all this stuff going on, you know, that dialogue going on in their head. So especially if you don't have that inner dialogue happening, you really do have to learn, maybe it's easier, I don't know, to trust the feelings that are coming up, right?
A-
Had you heard that
Absolutely.
before?
I haven't. I love that. And that's
Do
super
you have an inner dialogue?
interesting. Definitely. Constantly. Absolutely. Yeah, multiple conversations going on up there at once, it feels like sometimes.
I do
But I
too. I have an inner dialogue. So when I heard that, I just thought that was pretty profound to think that not everyone does. And what would it be like to not have, you know, maybe those people, are they better off? They're, you know, in maybe more of a meditative state in general because they don't have this constant chatter that's happening. And when we're meditating or something like that, then we are actually trying to calm that chatter, right? And
Mhm,
so maybe if
mhm.
you're not always having to try to calm the chatter, that's more relaxing. But I was thinking, like, you know, about people with trauma and people with anxiety. And it seems like that's rampant in our culture, these, this language, but we don't really have the language to describe the experiences or to work through them. And I think like learning the language to describe your experience. You know, I went to Naropa University, and I think you're familiar with that university. It's amazing. And I had an instructor there that said that's really what craziness is, right? Is not having the language to describe your
Mm,
experience.
mm, mhm,
And so nobody's really crazy, so to speak. They're just having an experience that we don't maybe have the language for, or the people around us don't have the ability to understand what we're trying to describe, right? What do you
mhm.
think about that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of great points. And I think the first thing that I would want to say is that we do tend to have an over intellectualized intellectualized approach in our world as well, right? So we love to think through things. And what's really interesting now is that research shows that our ability to kind of work through trauma at the cognitive level is incredibly limited. So yes, talk therapy is helpful. Big advocate for talk therapy. I love talk therapy. And also it's incredibly limited in working through trauma because it keeps people in the story. It keeps people in that dialogue, in that chatter. And what we know is that when you experience traumatic events, your brain kind of goes offline in certain ways. So your memory is actually not very reliable in the details of what happened during traumatic events. So, I know this is true for my experience. I had a traumatic childhood, and there are big blocks of time that I have no memories of.
Wow.
And that's incredibly common for people who go through trauma. And so how am I supposed to work through that in talk therapy if I can't remember what happened to me? And so that's why now we know that body-based practices, yoga, dance, acupuncture, massage, tai chi, expressive arts, anything that involves the body, right? Music, art therapy, are incredibly more productive and effective in working through trauma because the body needs to be involved because that's where trauma is held. And so it's hard because we love to think through and make sense of, as that's what we do as human beings. But what I love, and I think why I'm so passionate about this work, is because the trauma recovery really brings you back to kind of the fact that we're animals. We love to forget that we are, but we are, it's all held in this animal body. And reconnecting to that for a lot of people is incredibly challenging.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you just hit on something that makes me think of another instructor at Naropa. He had said that we forget that we are nature, right? We always see ourselves as disconnected from nature, doing this to nature, or, sort of just living among nature, when we are actually just these little animals, right? These creatures, and we actually are part of the natural world. So we don't often feel connected in that way. And what do you think is that separation from the feeling of being part of nature? Is it all the concrete that we've built around us? And we are pretty, honestly, like, unless you go for a walk, in the park, or have a retreat to the forest, there's days where a lot of us might not have any contact with nature outside of our plants.
Yeah, so much of what we are interested in, I feel like, is coming back to our connection to nature, whether that's through and connection to ourselves and connection to each other, remembering this kind of symbiotic, not, undeniable symbiosis that's happening within humans, nature, plants, animals, all of it, the whole universe. And I think, it's obviously a loaded question, but again, I think society and culture has done a really great job at not only keeping us in, intellectualizing everything, but also individualizing everything. So it's this very like me mentality. And we live in a capitalist society where we need to make money. And we've kind of come up with this skewed idea of what being a successful human being is, that's really disconnected from the soul of our humanity, right? It really just kind of keeps us in this very rat race mentality that, to stop, to pause, to remember that we're on this beautiful planet, to look at the sky, to connect to trees and plants feels like a waste of time to so many people. And I don't know if you know much about like neuroscience or brain chemistry, but the left side of the brain, the left hemisphere, is very logical, very productive, very rational. And our society predominantly lives in our left brain. But there's the whole right hemisphere that is intuitive and poetic and creative and explorative. And we're not, pushing people in our society to hone in on the right brain, which is where so much of our aliveness and our connection exists, is in the right hemisphere of the brain. And Some
Yeah.
people never tune into that, you know, never tune
Yeah,
into that
I know
energy.
some of those people.
Same,
Well,
same.
and it's sort of like the animal in us. Like if we were talking about our dogs earlier, and some of, my dogs do start to learn certain words. And so on some level, I see their little wheels turning, but mostly they operate from feeling, right? A lot of animals just operate instinctually from if this feels good or it doesn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not cognitive for them,
Mm-mm.
right? That's
Mm-mm.
all inner feeling perception. So
Exactly.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, on my trainings, I always ask the group, I'm like, how many of you have ever had a gut feeling or an inner knowing about something and completely ignored it? And every single hand always goes up, including my own. I've had gut feelings about people, jobs, different things, where I should live, and I just completely ignored it and went up here.
Yeah.
So most of us know what it's like to have the feeling, ignore it, and intellectualize instead. We rely too much up here. So
Yeah.
then shifting that, kind of unlearning that and relearning how to trust our gut feelings is so powerful. And then to live from that place, just like the dogs, just like animals
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
to live from that instead.
Learning to live from that place. I think that's where yoga has been so helpful for me, is getting me back into my body and out of my mind so much, and
Mhm.
back into my body. And I was listening to Oprah podcast, Super Soul podcast, and she was talking to a writer, um, Stephen Pressfield, I believe is his name. And he had said, there's no difference between, I hope I'm quoting the right person, but he said, there's no difference between prayer and art,
I love that.
right? Because when you're creating something like a painter is painting, or a musician is making music, or um, a writer is writing, when you're in your art, it's an offering
Mhm.
that's very similar
Mm.
to prayer. It's really your ultimate offering. And actually, oh, you know what? Just to clarify, Oprah was talking to Stephen Pressfield when she said that, but she was quoting somebody else that she had interviewed. But Stephen Pressfield, I believe he wrote The Art of War, which
Mm.
has it's not really about war, but it's more about what it takes to be able to do your art in
Mm.
the world.
I love that
Yeah, and that
so
quote came up, but
much.
it's such a powerful quote, don't you think? Because
Wow.
it is an offering, and it is where a lot of us connect to that higher, that feeling of higher self, or a higher being or entity, God, whatever we want to call it. And
Mm.
I just loved that. I felt that was so true.
Thank you for sharing that. I love that as well. There is no difference between prayer and art. I love that. I
Yeah.
like feel it in my body, just like this ripple of yes, yes, yes. I love that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think so much of, just bringing it back to trauma is that when you experience traumatic events and hold trauma in your body, oftentimes you feel very like restricted in your ability to create, um, and that right brain activity that we lose. And so a lot of trauma recovery as well is tuning back into creating art in whatever way that comes through for different people, right? And not being attached to the idea of it being good or right or worth it,
Yeah.
instead just creating with this, the innate intelligence of there's something inside of me. I'm a human with feelings and emotions, and I'm alive, and just that alone is enough reason to create, right? Everybody has that creative potential within them. And so reconnecting to that as well, I think, is a part of healing our trauma. Because most of us feel like we don't deserve to create, we're not good enough, our art doesn't belong, or whatever it is, the comparison, the competition of it. And just creating for the mere fact of being a human. That is, I think humans are all artists in our souls, you know? And so that, I think for me as well, I never thought I was an artist, and tuning into the fact that I am in my own way has been really, really radical in my recovery from my own trauma as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And actually that brings me to something I was thinking about in preparation for talking with you. And then I was reading on your website something that you had written, and it was called Having Abandoned the Flimsy Fantasy of Certainty, I Decided to Wander, that piece that you wrote. And I was really struck by the first paragraph because it's actually something I wanted to ask you. Of course, I wanted to ask you, oh, how did you get into this type of work, which you probably get asked a lot. But then I started to kind of percolate on how your work. I think sometimes for people, there's separation between their work and what they feel like is them. I know people that they maybe work in an office all week, but that's not what they do on the weekend. The weekend, they're this completely other person, and they're just grinding 9 to 5, but that's not who they would describe as themselves. And so I really am fascinated with people who are able to bring their work in line with who they are as an individual. And that's what I was going to ask you is, do you think your work lines up with you as an individual? And then I started to read this piece, and if you don't mind, I'll just read this first paragraph so that the listeners know what I'm talking about. This is a piece of Jeanine's called Having Abandoned the Flimsy Fantasy of Certainty, I Decided to Wander. My body will no longer allow me to pursue endeavors or people or work that is not in alignment with who I am. Every cell in my body now notifies me what feels right and what feels true. It has become unbearable to ignore my gut intuition. That's so beautiful. So how did you get there? How did you get to this part where you just went, it's unbearable to do anything else?
I think, I mean, it's probably a similar answer to how I got into the work in general. Is I think most of us find yoga, find trauma work out of necessity. Or I remember reading about you as well, and how you kind of found Chinese medicine and with your own digestive issues, and then we find what works for us and live it and embody it and practice it and make a routine of it, and then it's like, how dare I not share this with others, right? I can't keep this all for myself. How dare I not share what I've learned from my own experience? And so I think that what I just shared with you, I know exactly what it's like to have the gut feeling, to have the inner knowing and completely ignore it. And I learned that doesn't work, and that doesn't fulfill me, and that doesn't bring me into alignment with the type of life I'm trying to live. And so so much trust goes into the process of listening to your intuition, because usually, at least in my experience, it's the harder thing to do. It's the leaving the job, it's the leaving the relationship, it's the going into some sort of independence or creating some sort of art. And there's a lot of fear usually in doing the next right thing that your inner knowing tells you to do. And it's usually not the easy thing. The easy thing is to stay in the relationship, to stay in the stable, secure job, to stay in the home bubble you've known for so long, instead of branch out and wander. And I just have learned now, and from reconnecting to my body through all of this work, years and years of work, is when I've stayed, when I've ignored my gut feelings, when I've ignored my intuition, it does not serve me. It holds me back, and it eventually just erupts later. Anything I'm ignoring right now is not going to go away, right? Repression never works. It's scientific. It's if you push it down, eventually it will erupt. You know, our body will eventually say, no more. I can't take this anymore.
Mhm.
And so now it's like, whenever I have that gut feeling, yeah, maybe there's a moment where I ignore it still, for sure. Definitely still a human being. But the time frame between having the gut feeling and acting on it has become shorter and shorter and shorter.
Mm.
Um, so I think it's still just to normalize. I don't know if there's ever a time where any of us will get to the point where it's gut feeling, okay, I'm going to act on it right now, right? We're still going to take the time to percolate and feel into the next right thing for us. But yeah, just from experience, I guess, and being
Yeah,
the type of person who is always reflecting, is just in my nature to be always reflecting on who I am, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it.
that's really beautiful. I feel like I'm in a similar crossroads, and maybe that's why the question came up to me. And it really, I think, came out of COVID. You know, I had finished all my schooling, finished doctorate, then COVID hit, and it really wasn't a good time to just go start a practice. And I started thinking, what do I really want to do? Is that, you know, now I have my acupuncture degree. I think people just assumed that I got my acupuncture degree because I want to be an acupuncturist, when really it was about my own healing. I turned to Chinese medicine um, to heal myself, which I did
Mhm.
successfully um, through yoga and through Chinese medicine, acupuncture, um, and a lot of just self, you know, working on myself. And I was able to heal digestive issues. And I think I've worked on a lot of my own trauma issues, and started to get to this point of honesty with myself, where starting to do anything that was just because it was expected of me, or because, you know, now I have the schooling for it, so I should just, this seems like the natural path. It started to feel, like you were saying, unbearable. And I'm not a office person. I'm not somebody who wants to go unlock a, you know, door to a building every day and show up at that
Mhm.
building every day. And um, the more honest I was about how that felt in my body, really, I started to listen to like how that was landing for me, and the clenching that started to happen in my solar plexus. And I just went, what do I want to do? And honestly, you know, I heard a term that the dark night of the soul. You heard
Mhm.
that term before? And it really felt like this long hour. It wasn't an hour, it was really probably a couple of months,
Mhm.
where I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how to begin trying to know what I wanted to do. I really just had to sit with it and allow the discomfort, allow myself to be afraid, allow myself to be uncomfortable, allow myself to not know. And then sort of
Mhm.
quietly but strongly, all of a sudden it really came up that I wanted to write, which honestly, it was pretty surprising for me, because I've always been good at writing. I would say it's always a strong point, but it's never been something of me that I thought like, oh, that's what I want to do. I want to be a writer. And
Mhm.
I love, you know, I find I'm so happy in conversations like these, like what we're having now. It's such a joy for me. And I started to just go, what if I'm going in this direction where I'm trying to have these conversations that actually I feel like are helpful to people, and at the same time bring me joy, and I get to interact with people that I, you know, find fascinating. I just love interesting people. I love interesting conversations. And what if I just started on that path and I stopped thinking about what might be expected of me, or what am I going to retire? You know, I have at my age, I have a lot of people that they're retiring, and I'm like, I just figured out what I want to do with my life,
Yes,
you know,
yes, I love it.
and just thinking, I was having a conversation with somebody recently, and I just went, I don't care if I ever, like, now that I feel like I found, it's a difference between finding a career and a life calling.
Mm,
And if I've now found what feels like a life calling to me, then I don't have some need to retire from it,
yes,
right?
yes.
And so I was telling this person, I said, I hope I never retire, right? I hope I'm always doing this thing that brings me joy and that's
Mm,
helpful to other people. And I don't have to worry about my 401k if I'm always
mhm.
living a life that sparks joy for me, right? And
Yes.
I feel like so many people, they go to a job that they just can't wait to retire from because
Mhm.
they don't love it. It doesn't spark joy, and they are counting down the days so they don't have to do it anymore. And I just think that's not me. I feel like that's unbearable.
Yeah, it sounds unbearable. And also, if I can just name that, listening and watching you, witnessing you talk about your chosen career path, what in Buddhism or in yoga is called your dharma. When you find your dharma, kind of like your soul's purpose here on earth in this human form, it sounds like you found it, and like there's an elation coming off of you, a vitality like exuding out of you as
Yeah.
I get to hear and watch you talk about what you do for a living. And so just want to name that and
Oh, yeah.
that out
Thank
loud.
you. I
It's
felt
so
so,
beautiful.
excited to talk to you today, and not nervous at all, and just thinking how excited I was to start this. So you, as you know, are my first official interview or discussion, as we're calling them, these conversations. And you're the first one that I'm doing in this recorded uh, version, which, we had some technical fun with earlier. But I feel like that's it. Like, I
Mhm.
didn't feel at all nervous. I just thought, I cannot wait to begin this part of my life, and let's just make a start. Right? Let's make a
And you know
start.
what else I love about your can you hear me okay? Am I
Yeah.
frozen? Oh,
Nope,
okay,
you're not.
cool. What else I love about what you shared is that, so in I like to call it like shoulding on ourselves, when we live life based on what we think we should do or what other people think we should do. And it's so incredible and inspiring to talk to someone who kind of went a different route, because you could have should on yourself and been like, well, I just graduated from this and this, and now I should use it, right? And then you get into something that doesn't invoke that same amount of joy that you just described. And
Mhm.
could you imagine a world where people would stop shitting on themselves and instead tried to find the type of joy that you're talking about? We would live in a very different world.
Yeah.
And I think it's something to celebrate, because it takes a lot of bravery to live that way. It takes a lot of bravery and courage to not do what you think you should do or do what other people think you should do. Because it's scary. There's a lot less
It is.
stability, and that's
Yeah.
kind of coming back to that quote, like the flimsy fantasy of certainty. It's like there is no such thing as certainty. Life is very uncertain, unpredictable. No matter how detailed your plans are, they'll probably get messed up. Like, so why not take a leap, right? We have this one precious, beautiful, weird, curious, mysterious life.
Mhm.
I'm not spending my one precious life, at a desk waiting to retire personally. And maybe someone needs to hear that, on this podcast, is just a reminder, like, you have this one life, and yes, it's scary, but everybody told me I was crazy when I told them I was quitting a career to pursue yoga.
Yeah.
And now 10 years
Oh,
later,
really?
Yeah, just I'm making it work, and I'm so happy, and I'm fulfilled, and my life has meaning, and I get to kind of merge who I am with what I do, which feels like such a gift.
Yeah.
And if I listened to those people 10 years ago, I don't even really want to know what I would be doing or where I would be, you know? So we have to let go of all the external voices and come back to our own voice, our own inner knowing, and again, live from that place so that we can have a bearable
Yeah.
life.
And what's interesting is talking to somebody like you who kind of gets how I'm marrying these things, because you're doing it yourself, right? And so I am actually using my education, but I'm not using it in a straightforward way that somebody might anticipate. I'm really kind of writing my own script for how I'm going to utilize all these pieces that I'm putting together. And I remember even building my website and starting to explain to people what I was going to do. And I could see just sort of like this look like, oh, yeah, they just they weren't able to put all of these things together that in my mind, maybe I am highly creative, but I was able to see a way where, yeah, it could be cohesive, it could come together, and just my sheer will alone will, kind of let these bring this sort of allowance and this fluidity to this thing that could just be, really out there. Seemed really out
Mm,
there. I would tell people, and I read something that was like, don't tell people your dreams and stuff. And it's hard not to tell people what you want to do because you're afraid they're not going to get it and they're
mm.
going to be critical of it. And I have experienced that. But then people
Same.
saw my website that's, oh, they're like, oh, it's beautiful and it's so unique. And I've never seen anything like that. And it's really a platform for everything I want to do, for my writing, for my coaching, for, my podcast and my
Mm.
media and these talks. And it's really just offers me a, what do you call it? Diving board or like a launch pad.
Launch pad. Yeah.
Yeah, and also a home um, where I think I wanted to read kind of like a magazine, and you
Mhm.
can go on there and just draw people to spend some time. And
Mhm.
I once those same people who had just no idea how to imagine what I was saying, they saw that and they were like, oh, I could see they're starting to get it. And
Mm.
I feel like all creatives probably experience some of that where it can be very, especially if you care about the the person who maybe you've decided to share some of your dream with, if they don't seem to get it or they seem sort of critical or whatever, it can really diminish some of your enthusiasm, or
Mhm.
maybe make you question yourself, like, is this possible? Am I capable of it? But I just really am at this point where anything, like you were saying in your piece, like anything else just seemed unbearable, and it just almost was like I don't have a choice anymore but to
Mm.
start down this path of um, what feels authentic to me, what feels right, what feels like my destiny, because also it feels like the best way to make an offering to
Mm.
people. I've always loved talking to people and I've always loved helping people, but how can I do that in a way that feels like it could make any sort of dent, like,
Mm.
so I'm finally doing
Absolutely.
it.
I know. I'm so proud of you, and I relate so much to what you just shared. I'm very familiar with the feeling of someone kind of just glazing over when you're telling them about what you're so passionate about and excited about. And I remember a piece of advice I received somewhere along the way was, don't ask for directions from someone who's never been where you're trying to go.
Oh, that's so true.
And so, yeah, like whose opinion and feedback am I really looking for? You know, it's like, if this person doesn't even fully understand the vision or even the context of what I'm talking about, then how could I really rely on their opinion on what I'm trying to do? And so for me, having kind of like role models or people I look up to in the field that I'm in, that's, you know, kind of what is like the true north or like the guiding light of like, okay, look at all these other people out there doing it too. And being discerning with, yeah, of course we want to share our dreams and our visions, but being discerning around who we share it with so that we don't get that kind of knock off of our excitement or enthusiasm, but more, you know, the validation, the reassurance, the push, the celebration, the uplifting energy that keeps us going. So now at this stage in my career and my life, I know who to go to with my dreams. I know who to go to with my visions and excitement of what I'm trying to create and do in my life.
Yeah.
And I think what you named about authenticity is one of the biggest pieces to merging who you are and what you do, is that if it's not authentic, first of all, you'll feel it, right, in your body. You'll feel that disconnect, that dis-ease, and people will feel it as well. Like, I
Yeah.
think the reason that I have any semblance of success is because genuinely, of course, with appropriate self-disclosure, keeping boundaries, etc., being
Yeah.
professional, etc.,
Yeah.
I am exactly the same person when I'm with my best friend as when I'm, you know, working with people. And I think we're in this kind of new paradigm, this new wave of leadership where people crave authenticity. People
Yeah.
crave what's real, right? People connect to humans, not this idea of like, I'm perfect, follow me, but I'm imperfect. I'm walking right alongside you in this weird journey of life. Here are some things that have worked for me, and you can try them out, and let's talk about it. Let's normalize how weird and messy it can be to be alive. And I
Messy.
found that
Yeah.
relatability is
Yeah.
everything.
It can be messy. And I experienced that recently, just, you know, going through something emotional with a family member and somebody who I care about and have, you know, known my whole life. And they're a very organized person, you know, kind of like in their head a lot and very organized, where I'm in my heart a lot.
Mm.
And that can seem to them very disorganized. And it's interesting to try to have those worlds relate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I was listening to something recently that was saying like there's a big, I think it was Carolyn Miss, but she was talking about the old paradigm, like anybody born in 1950 prior, they're earth people, you know, as far as like the five elements go,
Mm-hmm.
they are earth people, where anybody after are fire people, right? And um, so we're still sort of living in these earth people paradigms, right? We're living in these structures built with people who maybe don't share our same, you know,
Values.
yeah, values, way of living.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there was a certain structure. There was the nuclear, what they call the nuclear family, you're probably familiar with. And there was a way to do things. It was like, you know, which I don't know how, but I did not get the memo about like go to school, you know, get good grades, and then you can go to college, and then you'll meet your partner, and then you can have a family, and you can have a job, and you can have house and a white picket fence and all of that. And that's very earth oriented. Whereas you see now there's so much more fluidity, and people really want to be able to have a different design of their life, of what their family looks like, of what their work looks like, of what their partnership looks like, whether
Yep.
that's intimate or relational, or all of these things. And that's more fire. And we're kind of living in this time where this like creativity and this, without boundaries, we're tired of boundaries, and we're tired
Mm-hmm.
of being tied to specific, compartments. And and it seems to me like, for somebody who's tried so many different things, it, when I think about like, oh, you're supposed to choose this one thing and then go do it the rest of your life, it's like, how? And how does
Ow.
anybody expect to be happy doing that forever?
Mhm.
And we see a lot of people are not happy, and we see that, these structures that don't serve so many of us are kind of making a lot of people, feel crazy, feel
Mhm.
like they don't have, um, they don't fit within those paradigms, and it makes you, the struggle is exhausting. It's like, I think of how many, have you ever seen so many exhausted people? It's
No.
like, I know 22-year-olds, and they can barely get out of bed. They're exhausted. Everybody's exhausted.
Yeah.
And I really feel like it's that struggle against a paradigm that doesn't suit us, and thinking that we need to fit in some way to an old paradigm. And
Mm.
it's like, if we can kind of shake that shooting, like you
Yeah.
were saying,
Ooh.
shooting on yourself. And I say that to people too. I say, nobody likes to be shooted, right?
Mhm.
And it's that kind of idea, is like, if we stop thinking about what we should do, what's expected of us, and start actually trying to feel what we want to do, what gives us joy, and start moving. Even, I get people can't just like quit their job
Mhm.
immediately, and it's not an immediate, probably it wasn't immediate for you either. It's not been an immediate thing for me. We see people who are kind of living lives that seem to have more freedom and more fluidity, and it's not an overnight thing that we do,
Mhm.
right? It takes some
Mm-mm.
time to get there, but making these small starts that go, all of a sudden you're starting to do something that brings you a little bit more joy, a little bit, and then it does start to become more your life than just your weekend, right?
Mhm.
And um, I can't remember if you're a law of attraction person. I feel like we've talked a little bit about that. Are you
I
law of
wouldn't say
attraction?
fully, but I understand it, respect it, obviously believe in manifesting and energy, and what we put out into the world comes back. And also, I think just in the world of trauma, it can be a slippery slope of, minimizing people's experiences and kind of spiritually bypassing. And so I really try to be aware of that. Because it would be, I've heard people say things to trauma survivors of how they attracted whatever they went through. And so I have my opinions about it at large, but then of course on like a scale of bringing in, calling in what you're looking for in life, of course I understand and definitely do my own version of manifesting as well. And I wholeheartedly agree with what you were just speaking to around this old paradigm kind of diminishing. And I think if there's anything that gives me hope, I mean, working with trauma day in and day out, hearing people, tell me, share with me, confide in me about their trauma narrative, what they've experienced, you need to have some semblance of hope that keeps you going in this type of work. And for me, I think it is the fact that there is this dismantling happening of these systems that honestly do traumatize us. The boxes we've been told to fit into, the design that we've been told to copy, replicate, regurgitate, that that none of us really feel fuels our soul, or a lot of us don't feel fuels our soul. And so the fact that so many systems that have been in place for so long are being put under the microscope right now and dismantled, which won't happen overnight. It'll take time. But our medical system, our, the way we approach psychology, mental health, addiction, our prison system, our education system, all of these systems that we've had to go through that in a lot of ways didn't serve us, or our humanity disconnected us from it, is being tested right now and trying to be shape shifted into something that is more in alignment with the direction we're going, the evolution of human beings. And so that excites me and gives me a lot of hope.
I feel it. I really
we
feel
are
that shift.
redesigning it. And that's, yeah. And to be a part of that feels exciting as well. In our own little way, each of us play a role in either participating in it or not. So that excites me.
We really are redesigning, I think. And I like what you said about old systems being dismantled, because that really is what it feels like to me. It feels like a dismantling of old structures that don't work. And I really feel it. I actually can feel it happening. And it does feel like right now what I'm doing with my life is I'm designing it on purpose. And that's kind of like what you touched on, is like redesigning structures that work for us, right? And that work for us to have real feelings and real emotions and be more fluid and sensitive and not quite so concrete.
Yeah, we're way more like weather patterns than we are concrete statues, right? Like we are ever changing. Just like, to bring it back, we are nature, right? So nature has seasons, nature goes through cycles, birth, death, rebirth, and we just keep changing. And so to feel like we're fixed, to feel like this is who I am, this is my identity, this is how I feel, it's just not realistic or a true representation of being a human. And so, we're not meant to feel happy all the time. We're meant to feel everything. We have all of these emotions for a reason. So to neglect and repress our anger doesn't serve us. It's there for a reason. We need to explore it and be curious about it. To repress and neglect our sadness doesn't serve us. It's there for a reason. We need to get curious and explore it. And you can say that about any emotion. And I think that's an unlearning and a relearning that's happening too with the younger generations, is this advocacy around mental health and mental and emotional well-being and socio-emotional learning in children. Because if we don't feel safe emotionally, we're not retaining any information. If we don't feel safe emotionally, we're not able to connect with each other. And so I think, thanks to a lot of research and trauma research, is now we know the importance of social and emotional as the foundation of well-being, versus in the past where it was kind of like a luxury to be able to explore, emotional well-being. It felt, like a waste of time. And now we just know that's just simply not true at all. And I love that there is this kind of push towards emphasizing that again.
I love that science is really backing up what so much of like ancient cultures and ways, like Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and all of these things. Like we've known for so long, yogic philosophy, that what happens is like that there's direct links between what's going on in our mind and our body, and there's not really a separation there. Like in Western medicine, we like to have a eye doctor, an ear doctor, a throat doctor, a stomach doctor, like everything's separate, but we know that it's really not. It's all integrated. And I love a lot of people, like, you hear all these millennial jokes, and I think I love this younger generation that's coming up. I love that they're pushing all of these boundaries. I love that they want things to be more fluid. They want more fairness. They want more inclusiveness. They want, more freedoms. And I
Mhm.
think it's beautiful and it's wonderful. And I'm so appreciative of that because I personally am somebody who really never felt like I fit in anywhere, and
Mm,
I really was traumatized by, had a lot of learning challenges, undiagnosed learning challenges growing
mhm,
up, and was really just treated as though I had behavioral issues, which was traumatizing,
mhm.
and just kind of coming out of that and really, like I was saying before, like I never got the memo on like, oh, do this. And I don't know if people just never thought I could do it, so they never bothered telling me
Mm.
what was the memo. But
I
I'm
want
kind
to
of
like
glad
give
that
you
I
a
didn't
hug.
get it, right? Because it's like I don't know. I just, yeah, I felt that was just really hard kind of growing up feeling like, I'm wrong. I'm just like this behavioral issue
Mm,
and
mm,
um never fitting in anywhere. And now I'm realizing that I just didn't fit into old paradigms. I didn't fit into old systems and
mhm,
that they're really not serving most of us, I would say a
mhm.
lot of us.
Yeah,
So
at all. And I think what you just described is how so many people experience childhood or their younger years. And I'm a big advocate as well for inner child work. Have you ever explored that?
yes.
I want to give your younger
Oh,
self like
yeah.
a hug and just
I
love on
want
her
to.
and
I've heard
celebrate
of like
her.
reparenting yourself, and not to
Yeah.
say my parents were bad parents because they weren't, but I can hold, more than one thing, one truth simultaneously, and really I can hold the truth that, my parents, my mother especially, she did the best she could with
Yeah.
what she knew. And at the same time, I struggled greatly, and I can hold those things to both be true at the same time, you know?
That's what it's all about. It's not about blame. And I think that's a hard thing for people to reconcile is that you can do inner child work and hold your hurt without blaming wherever that hurt stemmed from, because it's so true. Most people are doing the best they can with what they know and where they're at in their
Yeah.
lives, you know,
Yeah.
especially parenting. I've never had children of my own, but I can imagine like,
I know. Yeah. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons I haven't wanted to have kids is because it just seems so hard, right? It
totally.
just,
Yeah.
it really does seem so hard. And not just that it seems hard, I don't want to do it, but I'm working on myself so continuously, like the work has never stopped. And it's like, when would I, start? Like, I feel like, I was talking to somebody about ancestral trauma type thing, or, and, you know, stopping the, what's it called? Like, stopping the passing down of ancestral trauma. And when I was thinking about, somebody asked me like, oh, do you think you would need to have children to successfully like know that you've stopped that trauma? And I
Mm,
just was thinking,
interesting.
well, I wasn't, when she asked me that, I wasn't really sure how to answer that. But now I think like, no, because what I think is like when we're passed down this trauma, what we're actually past is pain.
Mm, mhm,
It's actually really like, um, you know, if our parent didn't work through their pain, then they give it to you, and it's the same thing like it's almost like that ancestral, whatever that is, or we think it's like ancestral trauma. Really, it's just when we die, the pain, it's a real thing, right? And it doesn't stop just because we died. It's still this thing that has to go somewhere until it's
mhm.
sorted out,
Yep.
right? And so that's kind of what I think of that. Like, so it's, our grandparents mm, gave it to my mother, and then my mother gave it to me, or whatever that is. And I feel like if I can find a way to work through that, then I
Mhm.
can stop, then I can let it paint. It's almost like the warrior who whips out the sword and slays the dragon, and all of a sudden they confront it and it poof, it just disappears. And it's almost like that. It's almost like it can go away if it is confronted, right? And you have
Mm-hmm.
to sit with it, and you have to do that work, and then I feel like it can just go away. Not only, it's
Mm-hmm.
not like, oh, okay, I have to have a child to make sure it's gone away. I can just know that it doesn't exist anymore because I myself dealt with it. I
Yeah.
I I ended that pain for my family, right?
Yeah,
By
they call
by
it,
working on myself,
yeah,
like by working on myself.
exactly. I mean, that's all we can work on. We can't work on other people. We can only
Right,
work on ourselves. So
right.
they
Yeah,
call it cycle breaking, right? Or you're a cycle breaker. And I feel like what's interesting is that obviously our behavior, so what our pain, right, then influences our behavior, our perspectives, how we see the world, how we internalize how other people treat us, everything. So the way we pass on trauma isn't just to our children, it's to
right,
anyone and everyone that we interact with. So
right,
they say hurt people, or
right,
traumatize people. And so breaking the cycle, whether it's from your parents or from any outside influence that you
right,
experienced and hold trauma from,
right.
doing the work on yourself to break that cycle, it transforms the trauma so that it's not transmuted onto other people. And that's what it's all
Yes,
about, right? So we're
yeah,
not continuing to perpetuate and
yeah,
spread trauma. We want it to end with us.
yeah.
And also to acknowledge with compassion that it didn't begin with us, right? And it didn't begin with our parents, and it didn't begin with our
Right.
grandparents. And it really is intergenerational and societal and relational, and it's so
Yeah.
many things.
It's
So
really just kind of like a luggage that you just keep, it's luggage that you
unpacking,
just keep giving to the next
yeah,
person, right? And
yep,
like, oh, you sorted out. I didn't get it sorted out in my lifetime. Now, here, I'll give it to you. Now you carry the luggage.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I think that I love to just name for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with the ways to work through trauma, that there are three kind of predominant ways that are named to really work through like these cycle breaking tendencies.
Oh, great.
And the first one that we went over already is talking about it. So that's one of them. It is effective to tell your story, to share, to free what you've been through, to share that with another person who can hear you and hold you and be with you and hold that space for you. That is important.
And
um
choosing somebody, because not
Wisely.
everybody can be trusted with our story, right?
Totally, yes. A co-regulator is what they call it. So
Okay.
somebody who can be there, who can hold it with you, who is attuned to you, who really makes you feel heard, right? They're not like texting while you're talking about it. They're really there with you,
Yeah.
mirroring you, breathing with you. They don't need to give you unsolicited advice. They can just hold your story. So that might be a therapist, that might be your best friend, that might be whoever, a partner, but a co-regulator to talk to is a
Okay.
part of trauma recovery.
Okay.
The second part is to sit with it. So that's feeling our feelings. That's the ability to recognize and allow, inquire into our feeling tones, our emotions, and also nurture ourselves through whatever we're feeling. So we might feel anger one day, we might feel depression one day, we might feel joy. Sometimes we don't even know how to feel joy, right?
Yeah.
So sitting with it, that could be through meditation, that could be through different emotional work, learning how to actually be with ourselves in our own skin. Most
Yeah.
of the time we're so busy, we never know how to be in silence with ourselves, in stillness with ourselves. So that's a piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah.
And then the third one is to move it. So whatever that looks like for you, right? Like we said, you need to get the body involved. So you need to move the trauma. So for some people, that's scream therapy, right? You just need to scream and let it out. It's gonna be singing and dancing and any embodiment practice like we went over before. So talk about it, sit with it, move it, and doing all three of those, not just one. You need to do all three in collaboration at different times in your healing journey. Probably you might be doing one more than the other. And like you said, that's probably going to go on for the rest of our lives. We're never like, and I'm done, I healed my trauma, check, moving on.
Yeah,
um
that makes me wonder. Thank you for those, because I was gonna ask you for some insights. But it makes me wonder too, like, do you consciously say you're moving, say you're doing yoga, you do you consciously have to be thinking about your trauma to be working on your trauma through yoga? No.
No. So it's again, it's like this over reliance on the intellectualizing. So just through moving the body, through stretching, through getting down into the deep connective tissue, the fascia in the body, we're releasing and moving, right? So in our synovial fluid, in all these different ways, we are releasing this stored, held, stagnant energy that is trauma, that is painful emotions that have nowhere to go, that get lodged in different areas of the body, that may show up as physical pain, that may show up as digestive issues, that may show up as XYZ, any, physical or mental, emotional ailment. And once we start to move the body and get it going, as you've used this beautiful word, fluidity in the body, to normalize that sometimes it feels worse before it feels better. So I remember
Yes.
as I started doing yoga, my anxiety actually got worse because it was like all of this is coming back. I did a really good job of pushing it down, and that was easier, right? It was easier to not feel this. And as I start to release it and move through it, and memories come back sometimes too, it's challenging. And so that kind of scares people away sometimes. But you don't need to know what you're doing or what you're moving through or what you're even working on. Honestly, you don't need to know. You just need to be kind to yourself through the entire process, no matter what comes up. I've had yoga practices where I was so angry, I have no idea why, and I just had to let myself feel that, instead of being like, why am I angry? I have nothing to be angry over. I shouldn't be angry. Never mind. I don't want to feel this. And then I'm just adding to it.
Then you're back in your head. And
exactly.
I think you bring up a really good point too, because one of the things that I tell people is sometimes you have to go back through the dark hallway of your illness or your trauma to get there. It's a long, dark hall. Like, healing is not always comfortable. Healing, we have this image of it, of like, oh, healing, health, and it feels good. But healing can be very uncomfortable also. And sometimes we do have to go back through the long, dark hallway to get onto the other side. And that doesn't always feel good. But I like what you're saying, is that we don't have to be, some things might come up while we're moving our body, but we don't have to be focused on healing any specific thing. And like you, I've had, when I first started doing yoga, I was angry all the time. When I would be asked to go into this pose, I would be so annoyed. And I thought, like, this is so beautiful what I'm doing. Why am I so pissed?
Yeah.
And I do
So
think that I
normal.
was probably healing old stuff that I wasn't even aware. I had pushed stuff down that I thought I was over because I didn't think about it anymore. But really, it was just lodged in my body and got sort of, when I would move, it got, loosened up and released.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also, so healing isn't easy. It's not always pretty. And it's also not linear. So like you might feel like you're making some progress, and then you have to let go of this idea of like going back or regressing, right? Because that's just how we think. We love that kind of map of linear thinking. But I just see it as like more of a cycle. And maybe the time we spend in certain areas, like I've, struggled with bouts of depression in my life, and I have accepted that might never go away, right? I've had anxiety in my entire life, and I've accepted that might never go away. So instead of having this goal oriented, I'm going to hit this like destination where I have no more issues and I have no more trauma, it's not realistic. And it just kind of sets us up for failure, instead of this more like kind of nurturing embrace of our human experience that can say, okay, like I'm probably going to continue to feel grief. I'm going to feel loneliness. I'm going to feel depression sometimes. I'm going to feel anxious. I'm going to feel fear. How can I meet those feelings with a little more grace because they're not going anywhere. As long as I'm alive, I have the capacity to feel these things. So
Yeah.
how can I be in a better, more intimate relationship with them instead of trying to avoid them? And
Yeah.
that for me, like, changed everything.
Yeah.
And I also know, like, with people I work with, either in trainings or one-on-one, so funny, people always want to know, like, how long is this going to take? You know, like, when will I be healed?
Yeah.
And in my, like, you know, humble opinion, like, I don't know if there's such a thing. What does that mean? What is being healed, right? Like, we're never done. And
Yeah.
that's kind of, now I see that as the beauty of it, because as we continue to cycle, we get to know ourselves more and more. We are evolving, we're changing, we're shape shifting, and becoming more friends with
Yeah.
who we are. And then that leads to us to have deeper connections with other people. It leads to us not ignoring that gut feeling anymore. And even though it's hard work and it's scary work and it might never end, and that people don't like that. It's the most worthwhile thing we can do, because it brings us into a more intimate relationship with everything,
Yeah.
and makes us ultimately feel more alive, because we're not really alive if we're disconnected from our bodies, from our feelings, and from ourselves, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, we're just kind of like going through the motions. And I think you're right in that it can be kind of cyclic. Like it maybe you think, I was reading like a meme lately that said like, oh, you think you're so enlightened or healed or whatever, and then go spend a week with your family.
totally.
You might have seen that, and then all of a sudden it's like, phew, and
Yeah.
I get that, because I do, like, a lot of times I feel like, oh, I've worked through all this, and even recently, going through some stuff and making the mistake of, one of the things that occurred to me lately is that just because I'm ready to work on it doesn't mean other people that might have been present are ready to
Yeah,
work on it, right?
definitely.
Or even have any idea what you're talking about.
Hmm.
Um, because it's just not even in their consciousness, right? And so, like, very recently, I was going through something with family members, and I'm one to talk about, like, oh, how this didn't work for me, or this was traumatic for me. And and I think they're thinking like, why are you even talking about this? One, they wonder why I'm talking about it. Two, it's like, it I can't, maybe it's because it's so close to home, I can't work out what's going on there, is that they're just think, why is she not, like, this doesn't bother us, why would it bother you? Like, I'm 46 now, like, you're nearly 50, you should have worked this out by now. And
Mm.
and although they didn't say that to me, that sometimes the vibe I get, like, it's not an issue for us, and I do agree, without shooting myself. I agree that while I'm not responsible for the trauma, I am responsible for the work,
Hmm.
and so while that might be uncomfortable for other people, I think, like you were talking about, finding the right you called it a
Regulator.
regulator, finding the right people to talk about. Because what I realized through trying to talk with my family members about this is, it just made me feel more destabilized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? It just actually made me feel that I'm shooting myself and shaming myself, and really just feeling more alone, when really the reality was I chose the wrong people to
Hmm.
talk about my stuff with. They also don't have any idea what I'm talking about. It's not a trauma for them.
Yeah.
So um, it's almost like I made a problem where there wasn't a problem for them. Now there's a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes when we talk to the wrong person, and we can heal our trauma without ever talking directly to the person that
Wow.
caused it.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. Because some people might never have that chance, right? So, what are they beyond redemption? You know, if you think about somebody who maybe experienced a rape or anything from a stranger, you might never be able to talk to that person directly, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need that. Reparation can happen internally. It doesn't have to happen relationally. Of course, it can. You can repair through working on that relationship with that person who caused the harm. But if the other person's not ready,
Yeah.
it's just gonna probably minimize your experience and make you feel worse. So
Yes.
being discerning around that is really important, and a
Yeah.
big part of kind of putting your pieces together is like, can I repair this internally, or is the other person ready to repair this relationally? And sometimes we don't know. We have to find out, and it seems like you just found out. Maybe they're not ready, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, but most of us minimize our trauma already, right? We're like, it wasn't that bad. So many people have it worse. Feel, this shouldn't still bother me. I should be over it by now. And we minimize how we feel and what we've been through, which only makes it worse. And so we need to meet people who don't amplify that minimizing, who instead allow us to feel whatever we're feeling, and just allow it to be what it is. You're allowed to feel exactly how you feel about what happened. No one can tell you that your feelings are wrong.
Mhm.
So we want people to validate our experience and normalize our experience versus minimize it.
Yeah. And not, yeah, like you're saying, not create more trauma.
Yep.
Because it does feel like now there's trauma where before I was just alone with the issue, and now I now I feel like I've created
Mm.
an issue where there wasn't an issue for the other people. So yeah,
Mm.
so it's just then it's just more to work on, right? So I'm just thinking about, yeah, being selective of um, who I discuss things with. And I really
Definitely.
like that you're saying you you don't have to, like, your, people that were participants in your, trauma, don't necessarily, like, you don't have to work it out with them,
Mm-mm.
which is great news. And I can identify too with, I have some sexual assault from when I was a teenager, and I'll likely never work that out with those people, right? So it's good to know that I don't need them for that. And actually,
Mm-mm.
that's really something I've been thinking about lately too, is like thinking like, oh, I already worked that out because I don't think about it anymore. But sometimes when I'm in yoga, and something comes up and I realize, and it's almost like I know it's that immediately. It's almost
Mm-hmm.
just like a little bubble that kind of comes up and is allowed to burst and leave.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't linger as long anymore, right? Because you're like, oh, you
Right.
again. Hello, we've done this before. Okay, you're allowed to be here. I'm not going to try to push you away. And just that permissive state, usually things don't last as long. It's the
Yeah,
resistance, I don't know if you've heard, but like what we resist will probably persist, right?
it
That
is.
resistance
Yeah, it is resistance.
makes it want to stick around versus,
Yeah.
hey, you're allowed to be here. Like, oh, okay, well, cool. They
I
don't want to stay
I
as long.
I heard something really helpful about resistance lately, that it's a law like yin and yang, right? There's there's the dream, and then there's immediate resistance, right? There's the thought, there's immediate resistance, like almost like a shadow, that couldn't be the thing without the resistance.
Mm.
So sometimes it some things feel so hard, and I almost go, oh, now that makes me think like this must be really important. If it
Mm-hmm.
feels so hard for there to be so much resistance attached to this thing, then that must mean it's pretty important, or the resistance would be less. But it is true, the more I work on that, then the resistance does get quicker,
Mm-hmm.
right? It
Exactly.
doesn't
Yeah.
linger as long. But I
Exactly.
like that idea that resistance is a force of nature, like
Hmm.
yin and yang. Without the dark, there we wouldn't know what the light were. Without
Hmm.
nighttime, we wouldn't know
No,
daytime,
exactly.
and without resistance, we wouldn't know what it is to feel the lightness of being.
Mm, yeah. Without struggle, we wouldn't know ease. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I love that. And it's just the duality of everything. Without pain, we wouldn't know joy. And so what if we embraced it all in the same way? Because we love to put everything in a hierarchy
Yeah,
because it feels better when I'm happy. So that's better than when
yeah,
I'm sad. But what if they were all just same level? We
yeah. They
embrace them
are.
all in the same way.
Oh,
They
I
just are. They
love
just
that,
are.
Jeanine. Yes, because that's so true. Like we think about things like this feels good, so it's good. This
Mhm.
feels bad, so it's bad. But it's not necessarily bad to
Mm-mm.
not
There's no
feel
such thing.
bright and airy all the time, right? To not be like rainbows and gumdrops constantly.
No,
It's like that. Nobody can really,
not real.
it's, it's not sustainable, right?
Yeah. And Pema Chodron, so you went to Naropa, so Pema Chodron's a Buddhist teacher, and she says that things are what we label them, right? So if we say sadness is bad, yeah, your experience will be that it's bad. If you say that sadness is an emotion and I can feel it, it is whatever you label it to be. So we create these ideas in our heads of good and bad, better or worse, right? Or like pleasure and pain, or what we prefer and what we don't. It's like if we could unlearn that and just come to this like everything's even. What if it was just an even playing field and we can meet all of them in the same way? Oh wow, I'm really happy today. Oh wow, I'm really sad today. Not, oh yay, I'm really happy today. Oh, what's wrong with me? I'm really sad today. But just, oh, interesting. This is how I feel. This is what's present. This is what's here. It's like it changes everything. It's so powerful and transformative. And you realize it just is. It's not, we love to make everything so dramatic.
Mhm.
And it's just another
We
emotion. And
do. We love drama. Even if we think we don't love drama, we persist on it, right? You
totally
know, I,
100%.
I have loved this conversation with you so much, Jeanine.
Me
I
too.
appreciate your time. Every time I speak with you, I just love it. I know we could talk for hours and hours. So I hope that you'll join me again.
Yes,
Um,
please.
is there anything that you would want to share about, just to a general audience or to somebody who's maybe thinking about working on their trauma or isn't sure, um, how to? I know you did name the 3 ways to work out trauma, and I think that's really helpful. And just any other insights you might want to leave us with today?
Mm. Yeah, we talked about the importance of a co-regulator, and I would say just having support, knowing who your like unconditional, authentic web of support is really going to help get through the trauma work, because you cannot do it alone. None of us are meant to do this, to do life alone, really, right? We're social beings. We need to connect with each other. And so community is essential in doing this work. And if you don't feel like you have that yet, starting to cultivate or create community of like-minded people who can hold you and hear you and love you and support you exactly as you are, and to know that you're never alone. So much of this is normalizing through sharing. The more we share our stories and speak about what we've been through and how we feel, we really realize that we are never alone in what we go through, and that brings us back to that interconnectedness that we've kind of lost touch with, um, and that it's a hard journey to do this type of work, but it is so worthwhile. And I think it's really the way of the future. So it's only going to become more talked about, more researched, more popular, which is a great thing, I think, personally. And so I think it's the way that the whole world is going, is to be more trauma informed, to be more emotionally intelligent, and that's really exciting.
I agree. And you made me think it's so funny because, when I was a kid, even, even today, in some circles, hearing the word like therapist or mental illness or whatever, it's so taboo, right? And it's so hidden, which I really hope that, and we were talking about the changes coming up now. I really want to see a change with surrounding that. But,
Mhm.
we live in Southern California where so many people start a conversation with, say, my therapist.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
maybe
So
that's
normal.
California stuff,
Yay.
but yay. And so I actually love, as a side, like, I think people, the like the mentality was like, oh, therapy, they're in therapy. Oh no, like they must have something wrong with them. When I think about people in therapy, I think, oh, this is somebody who's in touch. This is
Yes.
like, that's the
Yes.
person you want to be talking to. That's the person
Mhm.
you want to be in a relationship with. That's the
Yep.
person you want to have this friendship with or rapport with, because these are the people that are doing the work.
Yeah. I
And
couldn't
like you
agree
were
more.
saying, the work is not easy, but really, what else is there? What else are we here for other
Mhm.
than like to, you know, work out this stuff, right? We're not this I'm not here just to so I can find the right 9 to 5 job and do it for the rest of my life, right? Like, really, what am I here for? What are
Yeah.
my gifts? What do I need to work out, sort through? And
Yep.
who are the people that are going to help me do that? And like you're suggesting, finding the right people. You are one of these people. And
Hmm.
if you will tell people how they can find you.
Hmm. Yeah.
I would
Thank
love
you,
that.
Kate.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so much. And yeah, going to therapy is a strength, not a weakness. I love that. Yeah, so my first name is Jeanine, Jeanine, last name Talento, Talento. And so my website is just my first and last name.com, JanineTalento.com. My Instagram is just at Jeanine Talento. That's it. Super simple.
I love that. And I hope people will find you and get in touch with you if they've heard something today that serves them. And my website, as people may know, is drkrichards.com. That's drkrichards.com. And you can find me there. And you can find all my social there, as well as my contact. I want to thank my
Mm,
guest, Jeanine Talento, so much for spending time with me today. And I am going to take you up on accepting me to have another conversation with me, probably
please,
sooner than later.
please, yes.
And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're
Bye, everyone.
welcome. Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.